Welcome to the Observe Day podcast, the show where we celebrate the days that matter. From holidays to meaningful observances, we bring you inspiring conversations, stories, and ideas to make each day count. Whether it's raising awareness, learning something new, or simply sparking joy, this is your space to explore the calendar in a whole new way. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I'm excited to share today's observance with you. Let's dive in. Today's conversation is in honor of World Autism Awareness Day, and it's one that moves beyond visibility into how autistic lives actually unfold at work, at home, and in leadership. Our guest, Tracy King, is a learning strategist, neuro-inclusion advocate, and late diagnosed AUDHD entrepreneur who has spent decades designing education systems that work for real people long before they had a language for their own neurodivergence. Tracy was already building businesses, teams, and learning environments that were flexible, accessible, and human-centered. As both a professional shaping the future of learning and a parent of neurodivergent kids, Tracy brings a deeply lived perspective to what inclusion really requires and why awareness alone has never been enough. Welcome to the podcast, Tracy.
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah, World Autism Awareness Day means different things to different people. When this day comes around, what does it personally bring up for you now, given your own diagnosis and the work you do?
Great question. Definitely has a personal meaning for me. What I think about is how many people are on the journey of discovering their neurodivergence because of the constraints in the diagnostic system that we have and across the world, the criteria and the gatekeeping to better understanding oneself. And when we come to a place of self-discovery, or if we do get in the pathway of diagnosis and medical confirmation of neurodivergence of our neurotypes, celebrating the fact that we can now have so much clear understanding of ourselves, of what we need, how to support ourselves, so that we can live, our best and most fulfilling lives. And so I see it as an opportunity to raise awareness so that more people can understand their neurotype and their nervous system, and also to celebrate the beauty of diversity and opportunities that we have to support ourselves and each other.
Oh, well, when I said in the intro, you were already designing neuro-inclusive systems before you knew you were autistic. When did you first noticing that your own way of working was different from the norm?
That's a great question because when I left my job that was very, in the corporate space, I was ill. I had neuropathy in my left arm. My left arm was numb or tingling off and on. I had chronic migraines. I had chronic joint pain, pain throughout my body. I was having fatigue challenges and other health challenges, gut related and chronic illness. And doctors couldn't ever pinpoint what was wrong for me. It was always take vitamins, come back in 6 weeks if that doesn't work, if this doesn't resolve. And of course it didn't resolve, but no one pinpointed the fact that this was related to my autistic experience and functioning in structures that aren't supportive of me, that were just wearing me down, that was causing rampant inflammation and this chronic illness. And so out of necessity to grow my career, but also to work in an environment that felt more supportive, I started my own business. I didn't know at that time, back in 2014, that I was autistic. I didn't know yet, but I just immediately started thinking, like, how can I create a space that I feel like I can show up and do my best in? And so that started with my work environment at home and the fact that I could manage that environment in order to feel supportive to me. It started with how I manage my schedule, knowing when my hours of productivity are, and not laying so hard and pressuring myself so hard on times when my brain is not up to it. Knowing when I can do creative work versus knowing when I can do more detailed task work. It had to do with communication, knowing how best to communicate and how to ask for communication in return, and to set up communication norms in my business between, me and my clients so that everyone feels supported and nobody's asking, what are we doing here? or anything like that. Allowing for processing time, just being clear and direct and respectful. It also meant being tech enabled. I love working from home, but that means I have to create, a tech enabled environment for us to do our work and also to ensure clients feel supported. And so that's been a fun exploration too, how technologies can stitch together these processes and support systems for everybody now that my team has grown. But it also centers on norms and challenging some norms of the work world. Um, there are social norms and communication norms. There are ways that we do our work in the corporate spaces that we can have more flexibility around in the business the way I've designed it, so that everyone is working in their zone of genius versus having really diverse roles that touch too many things, right? That people can work during the hours that their brain is the best, that we all know what's expected of us and by when, and that we have processes to support each other. So there's, ways to escalate priorities instead of always feeling like I got to cover my butt if something goes wrong, whether it's my fault or not, right? And so, really, what it amounted to was creating supportive structures, but also flexibility because neurodivergence is a dynamic disability. And how my brain shows up one day is going to be different than the next day, given a bunch of factors. And really wanting to celebrate that difference in our business because it helps us not only be our best selves in our work, but produce really, really great work. And we're known for that excellence because I've created these systems. And going back to your question, like these are the systems that I created, not knowing that I was autistic. But as I reflect back, I'm like, yep, every single one of those things is centered in how my brain works and how to create a space that's inclusive for other people too.
What's one misconception about autism that you find yourself gently correcting most often?
Mm. Oh, there are so many. You asked me to pick one? um,
uh,
since I mentioned that autism and ADHD in particular are dynamic disabilities, meaning given the environment we're in or sensory sensitivities or how executive function is showing up that day. Um, One of the myths is that when someone shows up in a space and they perform a specific way, that we'll be able to perform that way consistently. And that's not
mm,
true because different days we have different access to energy, different access to, executive functioning, which means, motivation and task initiation and follow through and all of those functions that help us get work done. We don't have consistent access to that. And so, for example, like I speak at conferences and um, recently wrote a blog post about neurodivergent people speaking at conferences and the fact that if you've worked with one autistic or ADHD person at your conference, like what they need, what supports they need are going to be different from someone else.
yeah,
And they also might be different for them at a different time in a different environment, whether it's in person or virtual. And so I
yeah,
think that dynamic part of the disability is something that a lot of people don't know about and is also encouraging to understand yourself so that you don't beat yourself up so much if your energy is different from day to day.
yeah. Understand yourself so you don't beat yourself up. And from your perspective, why do so many learning and professional systems unintentionally exclude neurodivergent people?
I think it's because there's just been so much of a lack of understanding about neurodivergence, and people default to how their brain works when they build systems, when they build processes. And right now, society's built from what we call a neurotypical point of view. That doesn't take into account from its design how different neurotypes function in that space, how different disabilities function in that space. And so we're in this place of operating from a neurotypical point of view and then accommodating some other ways of being, which is not an inclusive approach, right? And not all accommodations are granted by employers. We're talking about workspaces in particular right now. And so when I'm consulting or speaking with clients or speaking at conferences about workspaces or learning spaces, kind of similar. I like for us to audit, like, what sensory sensitivity might show up in this space as? Is there flexibility for around the environment, around lighting and noise, around smells? Are there quiet places to work? Alternatively to, open and more noisy spaces? Are there opportunities for us to think about executive function, like time blindness, being able to move when we're working, or STEM, like with quiet STEMs? You can see my little desk STEMmy here.
Yeah.
Um, Opportunities to provide oral and written instructions for things, that processes are explicit, not just like, if you know, you know. And then thinking about our norms for, what we expect in terms of communication, social interactions, whether we can allow assistive technologies, whether we can allow, multiple means of contributing our best work. There are lots of different ways that we can audit, our spaces and our processes, our systems and our communication norms, so that everybody is supported in our spaces, and that just
Yeah.
improves.
Before we dive deeper, I'd love to invite you to join the Observe Day newsletter. Every week, I send you highlights of upcoming observances, creative ways to celebrate, and behind the scenes extras from the shows. It's the perfect way to stay inspired and never miss a meaningful moment. Sign up today at observeday.com/join. That is observeday.com/join. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Collaboration overall.
You often talk about neuro-inclusion as a strategic advantage. What do organizations still misunderstand about that idea?
I think one thing that's misunderstood is the prevalence of neurodivergence. And there are a couple reasons for that. Right now, our best understanding is that about 20% of people are neurodivergent. And research is telling the story that that's really low, a really low estimate, because of the gatekeeping and diagnostics, because women and people of color are not identified as neurodivergent as much as, say, white males. And so there are a lot of people suffering, not being unsupported, not knowing how to self advocate. And so that makes employers not realize how many people need support. And there's a common assumption that since I don't know that there are neurodivergent people in my workforce, I don't need to do anything about it. And that's incorrect, right? If you already know at least 20% of the workforce of people in general are neurodivergent, 1 in 5 people. Do you have a team of 5? One person is probably neurodivergent, if not 2. That means we need to be thinking from an inclusion perspective, not an accommodation expectation, and designing from the start so that everyone is, welcomed and supported so that they can contribute their best work. Another reason for it is it's unsafe to disclose neurodivergence right now, given that we're in this accommodation type of system. The research shows year after year after year that when professionals disclose their neurodivergence, they're often met with more bias and more discrimination instead of better support. And so right now it feels unsafe. And that's another reason why employers don't know that there are so many neurodivergent professionals in their companies, in their workforce, because neurodivergent people don't feel safe disclosing their neurodivergence. So there's some, attitude, understanding barriers in place. There are opportunities for us to choose to self-educate so that we know how prevalent neurodivergence is, and so that we can provide supports, which are not typically are not really what's the word I'm looking for? Complicated or expensive necessarily. They're things that benefit most people, but they're absolutely essential for neurodivergent professionals.
Oh, you were diagnosed late, right, with autism. I do have a question. How does late diagnosed autism change the way someone interprets their past career or life choices?
Wow, that's a really profound question.
Thank you.
I can tell you from, my experience is not uncommon as someone who is female and was not recognized as autistic growing up, even though signs existed. I worked all the way through higher education and the start of a career, not knowing why I was struggling and other people weren't. And so people, I put a lot of pressure on myself. You got to buck up. You got to do better. Doesn't matter if you're chronically ill, because this isn't working for you. And so once I self-discovered and then later did get the confirmation of a medical diagnosis, I had to grieve that time of not knowing. I had to grieve that time of not being supported, of, not knowing when my kids were young that I was autistic, that I was
Yeah.
neurodivergent, so I could support them. I could see in my parenting that I was teaching them how to mask, that I was teaching them how to operate in the world as a neurodivergent person. But I didn't know that I was doing that because I didn't have that self-awareness. And so there's definitely a grief that comes through, with that. But then there's also a realization that I'm not broken. That this is a wonderful way to be, and that I can now design a life that's more supportive. I can say no to things that um, would put me in a place of chronic illness. I can listen to my nervous system and honor what it's telling me, and just provide myself with a lot more compassion and understanding, and then advocate for myself. And so, I've taken that, from that grief to that understanding to now a place of advocacy, because there are so many others like me, who are, realizing later in life, and they deserve to celebrate themselves. They deserve
Yeah.
support. And the way that we come to self-discover is by talking with each other, is about hearing each other's stories so that we can see, oh, that sounds like me. I need to look into this. And realize you're not broken, and that there's a beautiful way of being for you once you understand yourself.
You're not broken. There is a beautiful way being for you once you understand yourself, said a very wise lady.
Mm.
Okay. How does autism awareness connect to larger conversations about productivity, success, and whose brains we design systems for?
You know, it's a wise point of view to design systems, spaces, institutions to support everyone who's going to be participating in them. We know that when teams are diverse, they're stronger, all levels of diversity. But we know research is telling us that teams that have just one ADHD person on them, a different neurotype, are more effective in innovative problem solving, and they're more effective in implementing new solutions. We know that autistic professionals bring cognitive and efficiency advantages to particular kinds of work. But we also know that structures and spaces and processes have to support that type of brain function. So it means we have to go all the way back to how we describe a job, and rooting our jobs in skills and particular ways of functioning instead of tasks. Because, as I mentioned before, neurodivergent people, especially ADHD and autism neurotypes, don't have access to consistent energy and consistent executive functioning. And so you'll see, for example, that there'll be a deadline and there'll be a lot of buffering up to close to that deadline. And then all of a sudden, like a week's worth of work gets done in a day. It's like
Yeah,
all of a sudden we have amazing access and hyper focus. And so our rhythms of work are different, and structures don't really allow for that when I want to see your butt in your seat for 40 hours a week, right? That's not a neurodivergent rhythm. Rhythms that require certain hours and productivity within those certain hours, that's not a neurodivergent rhythm. A lot of ADHD people don't have access to their best brain until later at night. A lot of autistic people want to function in quiet, perhaps earlier in the morning. There are different patterns for different people, but just like 9 to 5, but in a seat, that's not supportive for a neurodivergent professional. And so there's an opportunity for us to reap incredible benefits of neurodiverse teams if we allow for our systems and our environments and our processes to support how neurodivergent brains show up, and as their best selves.
For people who want to observe the day thoughtfully, what does meaningful action look like beyond social media posts and just talking about?
I love this question. I'm so glad you asked that because I think it's an opportunity to be curious, to listen to neurodivergent stories, to think more deeply about, am I a safe space for neurodivergent people? Because I know more than 5 people in my life, so I know neurodivergent people, right? Am I a
Yeah,
safe space? How can I be a safe person for neurodivergent folks in my life and provide support for them? What does that mean in terms of my relationships with neurodivergent people and how they show up differently and communicate differently? Um, and some as you're exploring and listening and being curious, you might find yourself aligned with some of those stories. It might feel like you, and then that becomes an opportunity for deeper discovery to find out if you also have a neurodivergent neurotype and how you can feel more supported so that you can be your most authentic self too. And so I would say curiosity. Yes, the posting and yes to engaging in what's happening in social media, but also curiosity and listening so that we can support each other in more authentic ways.
yeah. And you talked about the workplaces, not really talking about or actually design systems, even though they know that to about 20% of the workforce is neurodivergent. How come workplaces move from awareness moments to lasting structural change?
Mm. Well, it's got to be strategic, so top down. Like the leaders of the organization have to be committed to neuro-inclusion, to embracing diversity and creating spaces and structures that support everybody. Um, it has to be a culture change because there's a lot of misunderstanding all through organizations. And there's opportunity for both training, but also deeper understanding of each other so that we can collaborate better with each other. And then it requires um, change management, which is something that we continue to do over time rather than check. We had a training one day. We mentioned that we want people to feel safe at all staff. We're all done. No, no, that's not how that works. We need consistent change management, which means we're holding ourselves accountable to our goals to be inclusive, which means, annually we're looking at our processes for improvement. We're allowing safe spaces for conversation about what's working and what's not working. We're allowing for flexible work patterns. If neurodivergent people work better at home, a lot do, or remotely, different than sitting in a cube in a loud open work environment, that we're allowing for that so that people can be their best selves at work, allowing for opportunities to touch that training again and again. And what does it mean on a team level for supervisors, reinforcing the new norms that you want to institute, the new processes, the new ways of collaborating together that are supportive. And so it's a top-down, entire structure, cultural, and change management initiative in order to really be committed. But that doesn't mean that this quote unquote extra work is prohibitive. It means we're getting better. It means we're listening to each other. It means we're improving. It means that everyone can belong. And it means that we get to be more successful together. Corporations suffer from not doing this because of the rotating doors of people not being able to maintain their jobs and heading out and looking for a different opportunity. Replacing workers is expensive. Corporations suffer when they don't implement inclusion um, by conflict within teams, the loss of opportunity for innovation, the loss of opportunities because of groupthink and like rigid
Yeah.
structures. And so it's not just an expense; it's an opportunity, and it's important that we embrace that opportunity for a better work world together.
Wow. Thank you so much for that advice. Thank you for the recommendations too. Where can listeners learn more about the work you do and also connect with you?
Yeah. You can find my company, Inspired Ed, online at inspired-ed.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Okay, I'll put the links mentioned in the description so the listeners can just click and go dive into the site. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks, Wisdom. Appreciate you.
That's it for today's episode of the Observe Day podcast. Thank you for spending your time with us as we explore today's observance. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend who'd love to celebrate life's special days too. Don't forget to join the newsletter at observeday.com/join for more observance stories, tips, and updates. Until next time, keep finding meaning in every day.